You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Lovett.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. You are listening to that great podcast in the sky, And If Love Remains. I am your host, Mike Lovett, your sometimes virtuous, occasionally vile, but always virile host. That would be me. Yes, me. And with your help and the things that you do, which is to, what are the things? You know, subscribe, share, etc., etc. If you do those things, man, let's get the word out about this podcast. I'm very excited about the people and the ideas and the concepts that we cover. It's information that I think needs to get out. It's principles, and I love being principle based because you can apply it to any situation. And we have the legend back, the teacher of liberty, Dr. Joe Wolverton. Thank you, my friend, for being here today.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a minute or two since I've been with you, so it's nice.
It is. It's been a few minutes. Yeah, for sure. It's important for me to say this because I just appreciate all the, the information, the the books, the things that you put into my life has been so, fortuitous. Like it's been just what I needed. It's been it's just food for the soul, man. It's great stuff, and I'm excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today. So check Joey out at his podcast is the Teacher of Liberty podcast. You can find it on YouTube. He's a writer for The New American, and he's got some amazing books. The Real James Madison. What Matter of Madness? Did I get that right?
What Degree of Madness?
What Degree of Madness? And then of course his grand opus itself, The Founder's Recipe. Welcome back, brother.
Thank you, man. Yeah. I likewise gratitude to the people. It's funny when I think about it, no one ever introduced me to these books in a direct way, the way I introduce people to them, which is funny to, think about, because I never had that moment where a teacher said to me, read Cato's letters or read Algernon Sidney. Rather, it was, look at the index of the Federalist Papers and see what names you don't recognize. And that sort of, that was a little breadcrumb that led me. And I really do give credit to the Lord for him leading me to these things, because, and I'm thankful for Dr. Vetterli, who had the patience a guy like that, particularly, he, famous and didn't need to mess with a freshman, and he did, and grateful to him for that. But, I realized talking to my wife the other day, I'm like, I never really had that moment where someone's like, here, read Cato's letters. It was just me finding them and being like, what the heck? Why aren't we? I mean, they're written in modern English. It's not like we can't understand them. And, but anyway, like you say, The Founder's Recipe is the whole, I believe the reason that I exist. One of those things, you think that God isn't redundant, and I stay in my lane, but I like my lane a lot. I like studying the things that the founders studied and things that made them who they are. And Cato's letters, there's nothing above it. I mean, maybe Discourses Concerning Government by Algernon Sidney, and that's about it, because there are historian after his, and that's the thing, nobody writes about them anymore. Nobody, there's no biography of Trenchard or Gordon. There really are no, there's small biographies written hundreds of years, 150 years ago in some biography of British members of parliament and stuff. But the there's nothing, you can't just go and find out. You can go on Wikipedia and they'll tell you a little bit about it. Not much. Much of the stuff on there is very bland. And so finding Cato's letters and then reading them is, I mean, that's what set our founding fathers on the path that led them toward independence. You have one historian calls it the dress rehearsal for the revolution, because these came out in the years just before our founding fathers were born.
Right.
These were when our founding grandfathers were, just about to have their children. And, Heavenly Father knows how to work his business, and had these come out just in time so that these founding fathers of ours were raised reading these things as kids. So by the time they were in what we would call third grade, they knew Cato's letters.
Yeah. Yeah, as you talk about it, it reminds me of the story of I'm going to relate everything to music because that's what I do.
Right.
But it reminds me of the story of Bach. Bach was lost for a long time. Like people don't realize, like when Mozart or Beethoven, when they talk about Bach, they're usually talking about his son.
Right.
and and they knew of him. They called him Old Bach or Papa Bach or something like that. But and he was really the founding of Western music as we know it, in a real way. Like every there's Bach and then everything, AB after Bach.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But they it really took.
When did he live in relation to like Mozart and Beethoven?
So he was like a generation before. He died in 1750.
Okay.
So I think he was born 1680, 1705, something like that.
Okay.
So that's when he lived, and that music and that Baroque
So he
music.
would be around the age of Trenchard and Gordon, roughly.
Okay, yeah, he would have been, and it was him and Handel, those guys were the biggies at that time, and then it was completely lost, and it took Mendelssohn and some other kind of people who found him, revived him in the mid 19th century that kind of brought him back to prominence. So I'm going to call you the Mendelssohn of
Mendelssohn, yeah.
The guy that's bringing it back and reinvigorating the spirit of liberty, man.
I'll take it, man, because these Cato's letters, they just, talk about the New American, they're gracious enough. I mean, they're a news magazine, but they were gracious enough over there. I've been writing for them for 20 years, and they let me recently do a couple of articles, one just sort of reintroducing Cato's letters to their readership, and the second one being, it was the anniversary of the publication of their very last letter. And it was powerful. Their last letter was saying, this is what we've tried to do. Whether we've done it or not, time will tell. And of course, they get the credit of being the most often quoted authors by the pre-revolutionary generation. I mean, everybody knew them from Savannah to Boston. I mean, it was a thing. They get that credit. I mean, people like to turn to John Locke. I think, John Locke gets a lot of the credit that otherwise should go to Trenchard and Gordon, to Algernon Sidney, to James Harrington. But for whatever reason, John Locke ended up being the guy that gets a lot of the credit that, frankly, he doesn't deserve. Much of what he wrote was very sort of, what would you call it? Sort of derivative of better authors, and not nearly as. Who went away there? There you go. Somebody went away. Mike, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I cannot see Mike
Oh
anymore.
no.
I wonder if Mike can hear me. It shows my little
I
thing doing
I see
something.
you.
Mike, I do not see Mike. Let's see if I put
Oh,
my
okay.
glasses on. Nope, I don't see Mike. But anyway, they you know, his work, John Locke's work, was very derivative. And frankly, he watered it down compared to, if you read John Locke's two treatises of government compared to Trenchard and Gordon or compared to Algernon Sidney, you see that Locke's brand of republicanism, small r, Locke's brand of fighting tyranny is uh, watered down compared to Sidney and Trenchard and Gordon.
So we are going to continue our uh, our journey through Cato's letters. We're going to be talking about letter number 15. And let me just ask you a question. Should there be any limits on our rights? Let me just state as bluntly as that.
Well, should there be any limit on our rights? Yes. I mean, the limit that they mention in number 15 is our rights are unlimited, uh, but well, they're limited only by we are not allowed to use our rights to harm another or to harm the rights of another, to limit the rights of another.
Right.
So our right to anything cannot be used to harm the life, liberty, or property of another person. That should be the limit of our rights. There should be no the freedom of speech. I don't think it is illegal to yell fire in a theater. I think people have said that because I think when people get in power, even if you read history, even the Democrats with a small d, Republicans with a small r, once they start getting that taste of power, they want to do whatever they can to hold on to that power, and one of those things includes curtailing speech. No one was a more powerful advocate of American independence and liberty than John Adams, but he's also the guy that gave us the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Right.
So, I mean, no one is immune. No one is immune from that. And so, one of the first acts of a tyrant is to curtail the freedom of speech, freedom of the press. And that's why those two things were at the top of the list of rights to expressly protect in the Constitution. Because of that, there's an inverse proportion. The freedom of speech is inversely proportioned to tyranny. Right, the more tyranny, the less freedom of speech. You can count on that literally every time. And
Yeah.
so, no, there should be no, there should be no limits other than harming another person's life, liberty, or property. That's it.
Right on. Yeah. So let's get into this. And I think this first paragraph is really powerful,
Okay.
and it was such a great summation. It is Thomas Gordon. He says, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty. Without freedom of speech, um, oh, oh, oh." Without freedom of speech, which is the right of every man as far as by it he does not hurt and control the right of another, and this is the only check which ought to suffer, the only bounds which it ought to know, which is exactly what you were
Right.
describing. And then he goes on to talk about how speech and property are intertwined, and talk about that for a second, because that might be not as intuitive to a modern reader. Why is speech and property so intertwined in the way that they're talking about?
Well, because as you are allowed to speak freely, you are allowed to identify and to communicate any threat to your property. Whereas if there are threats to your property, but you are not allowed to identify and broadcast to others the identity of that threat to property, then their property is likewise threatened because they cannot be alerted to the danger. Right. And that is the idea. The idea of, the ancient Latin maxim of, divide them so that we might command them. That's the idea. Keep them from communicating. I swear, if you look to ancient history, there is no tactic more common among tyrants or would-be tyrants than to keep the people as insulated as possible from each other. That way you can have no viral spreading of critical information that might prepare the people for a defense against the coming despotism. Right? So just isolate that. And so your property is always threatened when your freedom to speak is threatened, because you are not allowed to warn your neighbor. And he might not see the gathering storm, right?
Right.
He might not see that person X who is attacking your property is about to attack his as well, particularly in a couple of ways. Number one, if you're not allowed to say those things. Number two, if you are punished for saying those things. And three, if you've lived a life where you don't have a relationship with your neighbors. There's no motivation for you to warn him because you don't know him. And that's how they want it. They want it either for you not to know your neighbor or to simply loathe him because he is a group you've been trained to loathe.
Yeah.
And without knowing him as an individual. So when they say your freedom of speech, I mean, they mean that in so many different ways, but principally, a person is unable to communicate and identify threats to liberty. And that places the property and the liberty of everyone in the crosshairs of the tyrant, because those of us already under attack are not able to communicate that attack to others.
So the idea of having, I'm thinking of like maybe China or something like that, where they have, an authoritarian government that definitely clamps down on the freedom of speech. Yet they allow people to have property or have, some semblance of capitalism, shall we say? That that really it's a facade, to think that like something like that is sustainable.
Right. It's for sure that, well, I mean, he says, right, that whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freedom of speech. That's the thing. Step number one is control the language, however you're able to do that. It's a wise thing. I know, for example, if you read in Second Maccabees, chapter 4, when Jason the tyrant goes to take over Jerusalem, the first thing he does is ask the king permission to establish a gymnasium and to have that, which is a school, to establish a school and have the kids forced to go to that school, right? That's the first thing he does. And
Yeah.
that's the first thing any tyrant would do: gain control of communication, whether it be the words, the actual language, and whether it be, the meaning of those words, and then the ability to communicate with others, right? Just isolate is
And the more you can consolidate that, those information paths, for example, it used to be, growing when we grew up, there was, the three main channels, and so everything you heard, there's three sources of information, and maybe two or three major newspapers in America.
Right.
That it was pretty easy for one person or for one group of people to control those mediums of communication.
Right.
Um, and we kind of had a golden age, I think, for a short time where all of a sudden with the internet, things just, exploded. Lots of blogs and
Oh yeah.
podcasts and things. And we still have some of those things, but unfortunately, like a lot of those has been consolidated again into Twitter, Facebook. I mean, there's probably YouTube. There's maybe 3 or 4 major outlets that everybody uses in order to communicate. And if the government can control those 3 or 4, I mean, you're sucking out the speech of 90% of the people.
Right. And typically it's all, the government will, they're never going to come out. A tyrant's never going to come out and say, hey, so that I'm able to impoverish you and enslave you, I'm going to control speech in this. No one's going to say that. They're going to say, in order to protect national security, in order to protect us from terror, in order to protect us from insurrection, in order to protect us from uh, profanity, in order to protect us from speech that is offensive. They're always going to paint it as themselves being a protector. And ultimately, I mean, if you think about it, Mike, I mean, ultimately, portraying themselves as protector does two things. Number one, it erodes the family structure, which is good for them. And number two, it provides a false family structure for those who have none. And those people have none because of generations of governmental policies designed specifically to destroy the family. And so you've got these pincers. The government is protecting you, and lots of people like the protection because they've never known protection, because they've never had a stable family.
Right.
It's
And
it's
that protection
tautologous.
that protection starts to look more and more like a prison every day.
Well, to those of us who know,
Right.
to many people, prison is an upgrade. I mean, I'm serious.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Machiavelli said, it's nearly impossible, he said, to free a people who become comfortable with slavery as it is to enslave a people who, love liberty. And so that, my thing about Cato's letters is I use their letters as as if they were seeing into the future. It's my little crystal ball. I don't worry so much about what the situation was in 1720 that motivated them to write these things. I don't care very much. I mean, it's a ancillary sort of interest of mine, what was happening. But primarily, my purpose for reading them and for sharing them is to use the past as prologue,
Right.
to say this is going to happen again. Here is, to prepare people and say, okay, we've learned this is how they operate, so maybe we can stop them this time. So yeah, so to use this as a way of warning people, because primarily that's why they don't want this stuff taught in school, is so that none of their deeds are brought into the sunlight, as Trenchard and Gordon explained. They don't want people having advanced warning of the coming absolutism, because it is that it goes from like in England, how they say it goes from Catholics are bad, we don't want Catholics to rule us, we now have a guy who is a Catholic pretending not to be, but the people in power are glad that he's in power. So rather than say, hey, you know what, let's accept Catholics as rulers, they know the people wouldn't support that. So what do? They make it illegal to speak of the king as a Catholic. They make it illegal to talk about the religion of the king in your home.
That's right.
They benefit, they reward those who inform the government of neighbors who are doing so. They make it, some sort of remuneration. If you hear your neighbor talking about Charles being a Catholic, please tell us so that we can punish that person, not for bad mouthing Charles, but for lying.
Right.
Because Charles isn't a Catholic, right, citizen? Right. And so just take that and put it to any, right? We do not. Oh, now you're gone completely.
Uh,
Now you're back. Okay.
okay.
Sorry.
It's okay.
But anyway, we do not allow, we want whatever is, we would not, for example, you had the New York Times suppressing a story about the president's son. Now, why would that be necessary? There's so much revealed in that one act,
Yes.
right? It's revealed that the New York Times works on behalf of, in this case, Joe Biden. Well, why would it work on behalf of Biden? Because it works contrary to the interests of Donald Trump. Why would it do that? Because they know that the fringe benefits that they enjoy as the mouthpiece of the establishment will not be enjoyed by them should an anti-establishment person be in charge. So they sit on this story until it no longer is damaging, until it no longer has the ability to affect the election. So as soon as the election is over, then they release information that could have swayed the election.
That's right.
And so that is the curtailing of freedom of speech, because in that case, you couldn't even speak of it because many people wouldn't have been aware of it was like, that's a conspiracy theory. That's people who hate Biden. But the day after the days after the election, no, it's the New York Times.
Right.
And so but it's too late to do anything about it. And so the point is, if we can get these stories out through these, letters that were so influential to our founding fathers, that it made them aware. I mean, that's the thing that people don't understand, Mike, is that they didn't read these letters like, these weren't Agatha Christie novels like, ooh, I wonder what happens next. These were, this is our recent history. This is what happened. It will happen again if we do not do something to avoid it. We must be an obstacle to this, and it's easier to be an obstacle to tyranny if you know the road that tyranny typically travels down.
Right. Because, and this, I think this is a key point, and you've mentioned this before, and I don't remember the exact quote, but you'll get it immediately. It is so much easier to nip tyranny in the butt when it's small, when we know that, okay, wait a sec, this is heading down a wrong path, so we're going to cut it off at the knees right now. And when because if we allow it to go any further, it's going to turn into a leviathan that we at some point can't control anymore.
Right, exactly. And so it is, they want, obviously, the Leviathan, they want it to grow, they want it to, it's that Sidney quotation where he says that the tyrants want to make it where by the time we learn of the remedy to their tyranny, it's too late to employ it. And that you do that through the suppression of freedom of speech. If you can keep people from talking about something until it's too late, until talking about it does no good, let them talk about, who cares? But it's too late for it to do any good. And so they've effectively deployed the weapon, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you chloroform somebody, that doesn't permanently keep them unconscious. It keeps them unconscious for as long as you need them to be unconscious to accomplish whatever crime you're wanting to commit. So
Right.
that's what the freedom of speech is. We will curtail it so long as we can use it as a veil behind which we can carry on with the the robbing of the people of their liberty and of their property. And we can, if we have this veil, and we can always claim that there's some virtuous reason, take away guns so that the streets are safer, take away guns so that the kids aren't getting killed, right? Curtail the freedom of speech so that we don't have good people afraid to run for office because they're afraid some whack job in Utah is going to kill them. We can't let this kind of stuff happen because it threatens all of us, citizen. No, it doesn't. But most people have been, now, after 100 years of government controlled education, most people are too stupid, too ignorant to detect the lies, to recognize the embryonic tyranny. And so they let it grow. And once that, the muscle of tyranny develops in the body politic, it never atrophies, Mike. And
Right. It has to be cut out.
ultimately, it has to be cut out. And so that's the game that they play. But if we believe that this tyranny is making us stronger, and if we call it by another name, if we call it safety, if we call it
Democracy.
democracy, progress, equality, fairness, just put a name on it, right? And Trenchard and Gordon have a letter that say that there must be a vast fund of stupidity in human nature because we keep falling for the same tricks. We just have to give it a different name. And
Yeah.
this letter 15 is just, I wish everybody that listened to you would just go out and just, all you have to do is read it for yourself. It's, as long as you're willing to put in the hard work. I mean, there's just one after the other digestible gobbet of goodness in this thing. Uh, everyone who loves liberty ought to encourage freedom of speech.
Yeah.
The favorable opportunity of serving mankind by warning them of the hideous mischiefs that they suffer, if ever corrupt and wicked men shall hereafter get possession of the state and the power betraying their master. That is the purpose of the freedom of speech.
There's a great quote where, and they're quoting, who are they quoting? Valerius Maximus, I
Yeah,
think.
Valerius Maximus. Yeah.
Yeah. Shout on, gentlemen, shout on, and use those bold signs of liberty while you may, for I do not know how long they will be allowed to you.
I mean, and the last paragraph, I think, is you switch it up and say, Americans, God be thanked, we Americans have neither lost our liberty nor in danger of losing them. Well, we are. Let us always cherish this matchless blessing, almost peculiar to ourselves, that our posterity may, many ages hence, ascribe their freedom to our zeal. The defense of liberty is a noble, a heavenly office, which can only be performed where liberty is. And I think, that reminds me of the American Cato, the anti-federalist, who said, if you do not, through a little prudence and a little wisdom, prevent the tyranny now while it's in its infancy, then your children will be forced to, as he says, wade through seas of blood to do that which you could have done with just a small amount of prudence and wisdom. And here we have the English Cato saying, shout on, because you don't know how long you'll be able to shout. So while you can, shout, warn about the hideous mischiefs of people in power, because that is a noble and a heavenly office. That's all we need to know.
Joey, thank you, brother. You can find him at the New American. You can find him at Teacher of Liberty on YouTube.
And Apple and Spotify as well.
Apple, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, and you can find him right here on And If Love Remains. Thank you, brother, for being with us.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Mike is gone.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
Gone but not forgotten.
First of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.